Imagine a city built not by human hands, but by countless tiny architects working together for thousands of years. A metropolis teeming with more life than any rainforest, painted in colors that seem impossible, existing in a realm most of us will never see. What if I told you that beneath the waves, right now, there are structures older than the pyramids, more complex than any building we could design? Join me as we descend into the warm, clear waters of our planet's tropical seas and witness something truly extraordinary. For the next hour, you and I will explore the coral reef, and I promise you will never think about the ocean the same way again. The moment you slip beneath the surface, everything changes. The sounds of the world above fade into a gentle, muffled silence, broken only by the rhythmic whisper of your own breathing. The water is warm, bath water warm, wrapping around you like a liquid embrace. As your eyes adjust to the underwater light, you begin to see shapes emerging from the blue, colors that seem to glow from within, movements that suggest life everywhere you look. You are entering a realm that covers less than 1% of the ocean floor, yet somehow contains a quarter of all marine species. You are approaching a coral reef, and you are about to witness one of the greatest biological achievements in the history of life on Earth. Let your eyes wander across the reef before you. What you are seeing defies easy categorization. Is it a garden? Is it a forest? Is it a city? Perhaps it is all of these things and none of them. The structure before you stretches in every direction, a three-dimensional maze of peaks and valleys, caves and overhangs, gardens and clearings. The colors are almost overwhelming. Electric blues and passionate purples, fiery oranges and sunshine yellows, deep emerald greens and soft lavender pinks. These are not plants swaying in an ocean current. These are animals, colonial animals. Each structure you see is composed of thousands, sometimes millions, of individual creatures called polyps, living together in a harmony so perfect they function as a single organism. Approach one of the coral formations slowly. Closer. Do you see them now? Tiny tentacles, barely visible, waving gently in the current. Each coral polyp is a simple creature, no more complex than a miniature sea anemone, its body nothing more than a soft sac topped with a ring of stinging tentacles surrounding a central mouth. And yet, and yet, the polyps are clones of one another, all descended from a single founding individual that settled on this spot perhaps centuries ago. They share nutrients through connecting tissues. They coordinate their behavior. They build together, die together, and reproduce together. But how does something so soft create something so solid? The answer lies beneath the living tissue. Each polyp secretes calcium carbonate, the same material that forms limestone and marble, extracting it from the seawater itself and depositing it beneath its body. Layer upon layer, year after year, the polyp builds itself a protective cup, a tiny fortress of stone. When the polyp divides and creates a clone, that new polyp builds its own cup right next to the first. And so the colony grows, one microscopic addition at a time. The living tissue is only a thin veneer covering the surface. Below lies the skeleton, the accumulated construction of generations. Some of the coral heads you see around you have been growing for 500 years or more. They are among the oldest living animals on Earth. Take a moment to let this reality settle into your consciousness. You are floating above a living stone city built slowly over centuries by architects no larger than a grain of rice. The reef you see extends for kilometers in every direction. If you were to calculate the combined weight of all the calcium carbonate in this reef system, it would measure in millions of tons. All of it constructed by animals so small you can barely see them without magnification. All of it built molecule by molecule, extracted from seawater and transformed into solid structure. The Great Barrier Reef, the largest structure ever created by living organisms, is visible from space. It was built this way, one polyp at a time, over the course of 8,000 years. Now, let us ask a question that might seem simple but holds a profound mystery. Why are these corals so brilliantly colored? Surely there is no evolutionary advantage to being bright pink or electric blue in the middle of the ocean. Camouflage would seem far more useful. To understand the answer, we must look even closer, beyond what our eyes can see without assistance. We must enter the realm of the microscopic. We must meet the true masters of the reef, the invisible gardeners who tend these underwater cities, the ancient organisms that make everything else possible. We must meet the zooxanthellae, and when we do, you will understand that what you are looking at is not simply coral. It is a partnership, a symbiosis so successful it has changed the face of our planet. Before we meet these microscopic partners, pause here in the water and simply breathe. Feel the gentle rocking of the current. Watch the play of light across the reef below. Schools of small fish move in perfect synchronization, their bodies flashing silver as they turn together. A sea turtle glides past, ancient and unhurried, its flippers moving in slow, powerful strokes. This is a place of peace, a place where life has found a balance so perfect it has endured for millions of years. The reef before you is not a snapshot, not a frozen moment. It is a living, breathing entity that existed long before you arrived and will continue long after you leave. You are a visitor here, a privileged observer, granted a glimpse into a world most humans will never experience. As you hover here, suspended between the surface and the depths, consider this. The coral reef ecosystem you are witnessing represents less than 0.1% of the ocean by area, yet it provides habitat for roughly 25% of all marine fish species. If we count all marine organisms, not just fish, the biodiversity becomes almost incomprehensible. Millions of species, many still unknown to science, call these reefs home. From the smallest bacteria to the largest sharks, from the simplest sponges to the most intelligent octopuses, they all depend on the foundation created by these colonial polyps. The reef is not just a structure. It is the epicenter of ocean biodiversity, a biological hotspot that rivals even the tropical rainforests in the density and variety of life it supports. Now we must shrink ourselves down, at least in our imagination, to understand the true secret of the reef. Within the tissue of every coral polyp, living inside the cells themselves, are millions upon millions of single-celled algae called zooxanthellae. These microscopic organisms are the reason reef-building corals can only survive in shallow, sunlit waters. They are photosynthetic, like plants, converting sunlight into chemical energy. And here is where the magic happens. The zooxanthellae produce far more sugar through photosynthesis than they need for themselves. The excess, sometimes up to 90% of what they produce, is transferred directly to the coral polyp. In exchange, the coral provides the algae with a safe home, protection from predators, and access to nutrients from its own waste products. This is not cooperation. This is integration. These two organisms function as one. Think about what this means for a moment. The coral polyp is an animal, but it functions like a plant. It harvests sunlight through its internal farmers, the zooxanthellae, and uses that solar energy to fuel its growth. This is why coral reefs only thrive in clear, shallow tropical waters. They need sunlight. They need warmth. The zooxanthellae cannot photosynthesize in darkness or cold. Remove the sunlight and the partnership collapses. Remove the zooxanthellae and the coral polyp cannot gather enough food through its tentacles alone to both survive and build its calcium carbonate skeleton. The relationship is not optional. It is absolutely essential. Neither partner can create a reef without the other. This symbiosis, perfected over millions of years of evolution, is the foundation of everything you see around you. The colors you see in healthy coral are primarily the colors of the zooxanthellae themselves, giving the coral tissue shades of brown, green, and golden yellow. But many corals also produce their own pigments, fluorescent proteins that glow in shades of cyan, magenta, orange, and green. These pigments may serve multiple purposes. Some scientists believe they act as sunscreen, protecting both the coral and its algae from excessive ultraviolet radiation. Others suggest they might help distribute light more evenly throughout the tissue, ensuring all the zooxanthellae receive the energy they need. Still others propose they may play a role in attracting prey or even in coral reproduction. The truth is, we are still learning. The reef holds secrets we have only begun to uncover. What is certain is that these colors are not decorative. They are functional. They are survival. Let us watch the partnership in action. It is daytime, and the sun hangs high above the surface, its rays penetrating deep into the clear water. Inside each polyp, the zooxanthellae are working. They are capturing photons of light and using that energy to split water molecules and combine carbon dioxide into sugar. Oxygen is released as a waste product, bubbling out of the coral and dissolving into the surrounding seawater. Yes, coral reefs breathe out oxygen, just like forests. They contribute to the oxygen in our atmosphere. Meanwhile, the coral polyp is also active. Its tentacles wave gently, occasionally capturing a passing copepod or other microscopic prey. The polyp digests the prey and releases nitrogen and phosphorus compounds that the zooxanthellae desperately need but cannot get from seawater alone. Each partner gives what the other lacks. It is a perfect exchange. This partnership is ancient beyond imagining. The first coral and algae symbiosis likely formed over 200 million years ago in the Triassic period, when dinosaurs were just beginning their reign on land. Since that time, the partnership has been refined, tested by countless environmental changes, mass extinctions, and climate shifts. The corals and their zooxanthellae have weathered ice ages and hothouse climates. They have adapted to changing ocean chemistry and rising and falling sea levels. They have proven themselves to be among the most resilient partnerships in the history of life. And yet, as we will discover later in our journey, even this ancient and successful alliance has limits. There are stresses it cannot endure. There are changes happening now, in our time, that threaten to break bonds that have held for millions of years. But for now, in this moment, the partnership thrives. The reef around you is proof of its success. Every square meter of living coral represents billions of these microscopic partnerships, all working in harmony. The zooxanthellae photosynthesize. The reef grows, and in the shadows and crevices of that growing structure, an entire ecosystem finds refuge. The partnership between coral and algae creates the physical foundation, but what lives within and around that foundation is almost beyond comprehension. We are about to explore the biodiversity of the reef, and I want you to prepare yourself. What you are about to witness might fundamentally change how you think about life on this planet. The sheer variety, the impossible creativity, the explosion of forms and colors and survival strategies is almost overwhelming. You ready? Before we move on, take one more look at the coral itself. Run your eyes along the contours of a brain coral, its surface covered with meandering valleys and ridges like a fossilized brain. Notice the delicate branches of a staghorn coral reaching upward toward the light like the antlers of some underwater deer. Observe the flat, plate-like structure of a table, coral, perfectly positioned to maximize its exposure to the sun. Each species has evolved its own architecture, its own strategy for growth. Some grow fast and fragile, quickly colonizing available space. Others grow slowly and strong, building massive fortress-like structures that can endure for centuries. Together, they create a three-dimensional landscape of almost infinite complexity. And into every niche, every crevice, every shadow and sunlit surface, life has found a way to take hold. The coral and its zooxanthellae represent one of the most successful collaborations in nature. But they are not alone in this strategy. Throughout the reef, you will find other partnerships, other symbioses. Clownfish living among the stinging tentacles of anemones, immune to their poison and protected by their host. Cleaner shrimps setting up stations where larger fish come to have parasites removed, a service traded for safety from predation. Algae growing on the shells of turtles, gaining mobility and access to nutrients. The reef is not a collection of independent organisms competing for survival. It is a web of relationships, a network of mutual dependencies. Life here has learned that cooperation is often more effective than competition. The coral and zooxanthellae were perhaps the first to discover this truth. They certainly perfected it better than most. And they built a city where countless others could come and learn the same lesson. Now let us turn our attention to the structure itself, the physical architecture of the reef. If you could drain all the water from this reef and walk across its surface, you would find yourself navigating a landscape as complex as any mountain range. There would be towering pinnacles rising 10 or 20 meters from the seafloor, deep canyons splitting the reef into sections, caves and tunnels winding through the structure, some large enough to swim through, others barely wide enough for a small fish. Overhangs creating shadows and shelter. Flat plateaus where light floods every surface. The reef is not uniform. It is a tapestry of different habitats, each with its own conditions, its own challenges, its own community of inhabitants. And every bit of this three-dimensional maze was constructed, block by coral polyps. Different coral species favor different zones on the reef. In the shallowest areas where waves break and surge, you find the toughest corals, compact and strong, built to withstand the constant pounding of water. These are often the boulder corals and the brain corals, their massive heads resisting the force that would shatter more delicate forms. Move a bit deeper where the water calms, and you find branching corals becoming more common. Staghorn and elkhorn corals reach upward, their intricate branches maximizing surface area for their zooxanthellae. Deeper still, where light begins to fade, the corals grow in plates and sheets, spreading horizontally to capture every available photon. Each species grows where it can best succeed, and together they create zones and gradients throughout the reef, a vertical stratification of life. The structure of the reef creates structure in the water itself. As currents encounter the solid barrier of coral, they are deflected upward, carrying nutrients from the deep and distributing them across the reef. Water flows through the complex three-dimensional maze, its speed and direction constantly changing. In some spots, the current is strong and steady, bringing a constant supply of planktonic food to filter feeders. In other spots, the water is calm and still, creating refuges where larvae can settle and young fish can hide. The physical structure creates microhabitats, thousands of different environmental niches packed into a relatively small area. And life, endlessly creative and opportunistic, fills every single one of those niches. If there is a way to make a living on the reef, evolution has found it. If there is a resource that can be exploited, some organism has specialized to exploit it. Look closely at the surface of the reef and you will see that coral is not the only builder here. Coralline algae, algae that deposit calcium carbonate just like corals do, paint many surfaces in shades of pink and purple. These algae are the mortar between the bricks of coral, cementing loose fragments together and reinforcing the structure. When a storm breaks a branching coral, the fragments do not necessarily die. Many can survive if they land in a suitable spot, and the coralline algae will slowly cement them in place, allowing them to continue growing. The algae also create a chemical signal that attracts coral larvae, helping new corals find appropriate places to settle. The reef building process involves many partners, not just the corals themselves. It is a community project, a collective construction spanning decades and centuries. But not everything on the reef is a builder. Many organisms are borers and excavators, slowly dissolving and consuming the calcium carbonate structure. Sponges, worms, mollusks, and even some fish graze on the reef, either eating the algae that grows on its surface or actually consuming the limestone itself. Parrotfish, with their powerful beak-like teeth, bite off chunks of coral, digest the algae and polyps, and excrete the limestone as fine white sand. A single large parrotfish can produce hundreds of kilograms of sand every year. Those pristine white sand beaches you see on tropical islands? Much of that sand passed through a parrotfish first. The reef is not just being built. It is constantly being destroyed and recycled, broken down and reconstructed. It is dynamic. It is in constant flux. And somehow, despite all this destruction, the building process usually stays ahead. The reef grows. The architecture of the reef also includes negative space, the gaps and voids that are just as important as the solid structure. Caves penetrate deep into the reef, some extending for dozens of meters into darkness. These caves provide habitat for creatures that cannot tolerate bright light. Lobsters hide in crevices during the day, their long antennae waving from the shadows. Moray eels occupy holes in the reef, their heads protruding as they watch for prey. Octopuses make their lairs in gaps between coral heads, decorating the entrance with empty shells and debris. Every crack, every crevice, every hollow space becomes someone's home. The reef is not just a surface. It is volume. It is three-dimensional space filled with hiding places and hunting grounds, with safe havens and dangerous corridors. It is architecture that enables life rather than merely containing it. The reef structure also changes over time in ways that have nothing to do with growth. Storm waves can break apart fragile branching corals and topple massive heads that have grown for centuries. When this happens, the reef does not die. It adapts. Broken coral fragments become new substrate for settlement. Toppled heads create new overhangs and caves. The destruction opens space for new growth, for young corals to establish themselves in areas that were previously occupied. In some ways, disturbance is healthy for the reef. It creates diversity. It prevents any single species from dominating. It maintains a constant cycle of death and renewal, destruction and creation. The reef that exists today is not the same reef that existed a decade ago, and it will not be the same reef a decade from now. It is always changing, always evolving, always responding to the endless challenges of the ocean environment. Load here for a moment and consider the patience required to build what you see before you. The largest coral heads on this reef have been growing for longer than your country has existed. Some have been growing since before Europeans discovered the Americas, since before the Renaissance, since the Middle Ages. A coral polyp adds perhaps a centimeter to its skeleton each year, sometimes less. The reef grows upward at a rate measured in millimeters per year. And yet, given enough time, given centuries and millennia of patient construction, these microscopic animals create structures vast enough to alter ocean currents, to create islands, to shelter coastlines from storms. The reef is a testament to the power of small actions repeated endlessly over vast spans of time. It is a reminder that the most impressive achievements often come, not from grand gestures, but from quiet persistence. Now we must turn our attention to the inhabitants of this underwater city, and I must warn you that what you are about to experience might overwhelm your senses. The biodiversity of a coral reef is difficult to comprehend until you witness it yourself. In every direction you look, there is life. Not just life, but an explosion of forms and colors and behaviors so varied that the mind struggles to categorize it all. Fish of every conceivable shape swim through the water. Invertebrates cling to every surface. Plants and algae compete for space. Bacteria and archaea, invisible but abundant, process nutrients and recycle waste. A single coral head the size of a car might provide habitat for hundreds of species. A single reef might harbor thousands. The entire reef system might contain millions. We have only scratched the surface of cataloging this diversity. New species are discovered regularly. Let us start with the fish, since they are the most visible and the most familiar to us. See that school of bright yellow tangs, dozens of individuals moving as one, their bodies flashing like coins in the sunlight? They are herbivores, grazing on the algae that grows on dead coral and rock. Without them and other herbivorous fish, the algae would overgrow the reef, smothering young corals and preventing new settlement. Now look at that parrotfish, its body a patchwork of blue and green and pink. It scrapes algae from the coral surface using its beak-like teeth. And there, hovering above that coral head, a small grouper waits patiently for smaller fish to swim too close. It is a predator, an ambush hunter, relying on speed and surprise. Each fish has its role, its niche, its specific way of making a living on the reef. The fish diversity extends far beyond what you can see in this single glance. There are fish that live their entire lives within inches of a particular coral head. Fish that migrate across the reef daily, moving from feeding grounds to resting spots. Fish that are active by day and others that only emerge at night. Fish that swim in the open water, fish that hug the bottom, fish that hide in caves. Fish with venom in their spines. Fish that produce mucus, sleeping bags to protect themselves. Fish that can change their sex depending on social circumstances. Fish that farm algae gardens. Fish that use tools. The creativity of evolution, when applied to fish over millions of years, produces an almost infinite variety. And every single one of these species depends on the reef, on the structure and shelter and food it provides. But fish are only the most visible residents of the reef. Lift a piece of dead coral and you will discover a hidden world beneath. Brittle stars with their long, sinuous arms hide in crevices during the day and emerge at night to feed. Tiny crabs and shrimp scurry away from the sudden light, seeking new hiding places. Worms of incredible variety burrow through the sand and limestone, some creating tubes of mucus or sand, others living freely. Snails and other mollusks crawl across surfaces, grazing on algae or hunting smaller prey. Sea stars, those classic symbols of the ocean, move slowly across the reef on hundreds of tiny tube feet, searching for prey or scavenging dead material. Each piece of rubble is its own ecosystem. Each crack in the coral is a microhabitat. The reef is not just busy on its surface. The real action happens in the spaces between. Some of the most ancient and alien creatures on the reef are the sponges. They appear simple, sometimes looking like vases or tubes or encrusting blobs covering the coral. But sponges are sophisticated filter feeders, pumping thousands of liters of seawater through their bodies every day, extracting bacteria and organic particles too small for most other animals to capture. A large sponge can filter its own body volume of water every few seconds. The entire sponge community on a reef might filter all the water in the area every few days, clarifying it, cleaning it, recycling nutrients. Sponges also provide habitat for a host of other organisms. Shrimp, worms, and small fish often live inside the cavities of sponges, gaining protection while the sponge benefits from having residents that help defend it from predators. Again, we see symbiosis. Again, cooperation and mutual benefit. And then there are the creatures that seem to blur the line between plant and animal. Sea anemones, close relatives of coral, anchor themselves to the reef and extend their tentacles to capture passing prey, yet they often host symbiotic algae just like coral does. Soft corals and sea fans, which are also cnidarians like hard corals and anemones, sway in the current, their polyps extended to feed. They do not build calcium carbonate skeletons, so they contribute little to reef structure, but they add color and texture and provide additional habitat. Some soft corals contain chemicals that deter predators, making them unpalatable to fish. Others can rapidly contract when touched, a defense mechanism that protects their delicate polyps. The line between plant and animal, between individual and colony, between species and ecosystem becomes blurred here. Everything is interconnected. Swimming through this reef, you become aware that you are not just observing life. You are immersed in it. Every cubic meter of water contains zooplankton, microscopic animals drifting in the currents. Copepods, tiny crustaceans barely visible to the naked eye, are present in millions. They feed on even smaller phytoplankton and bacteria, and they in turn become food for small fish and coral polyps. The water itself is alive, thick with organisms. At night, when many plankton migrate upward from the deep, the water becomes so dense with life that divers report feeling as if they are flying through a snowstorm of living things. This planktonic soup is the foundation of the reef food web. Everything larger ultimately depends on these microscopic drifters. They are the grass of the sea, and the reef is the savanna that depends on them. Take a moment to simply float here and let the reality of what you are witnessing sink in. You are in the middle of the ocean, kilometers from the nearest land, yet you are surrounded by more life than you would find in most terrestrial environments. The biodiversity here rivals that of a rainforest, packed into a much smaller space. Scientists estimate that coral reefs, despite covering less than 1% of the ocean floor, contain somewhere between 1/4 and 1/3 of all marine species. Some estimates place the total number of species on reefs at over 1 million, though most have never been formally described by science. This is one of the greatest concentrations of biodiversity on planet Earth, and it exists because of the foundation built by coral and algae working together. The partnership you learned about earlier enables all of this. Remove the coral and the entire ecosystem collapses. Let us now follow the rhythm of a single day on the reef and see how life changes with the passage of the sun. Dawn comes early in the tropics. The sky lightens from black to deep blue to pink and gold in a span of minutes. As the first rays of sunlight penetrate the water, the reef begins to awaken. The change is not sudden. It is gradual, like a city slowly coming to life as its inhabitants begin their daily routines. Nocturnal fish that have been hunting through the night return to their daytime hiding spots. Diurnal fish emerge from crevices and caves where they spent the night sheltered from predators. The shift change is happening, and it happens every day, twice a day, at dawn and dusk, a timeless rhythm that has repeated for millions of years. As the sun climbs higher, the reef becomes increasingly active. Schools of small planktivorous fish move out from the shelter of the reef and into the open water above it, where they form large aggregations feeding on zooplankton drifting by in the current. They must balance two competing needs during the day. They must eat, which requires being out in the open where plankton is abundant. But being in the open also makes them vulnerable to predators. So they school together, thousands of individuals finding safety in numbers. A predator attacking the school will likely confuse itself with too many targets. The school can also mob a predator, swarming around it and disorienting it. The individuals take turns being on the outside of the school where danger is greatest. It is cooperation through statistics. It is safety through collective behavior. On the reef itself, the daytime shift is fully active. Parrotfish scrape at the coral and algae, their beaks producing audible crunching sounds that carry through the water. Tangs and surgeonfish graze on filamentous algae growing on dead coral surfaces. Wrasses hunt for small crustaceans hiding in the sand. Butterfly fish, with their elongated snouts, probe crevices searching for worms and small invertebrates. Each fish knows its role and its territory. Many species are territorial during the day, defending a particular patch of reef from others of their species. The damselfish are particularly aggressive, charging at any intruder that enters their claimed area regardless of size. These tiny fish, barely longer than your finger, will fearlessly attack fish 10 times their size if those fish threaten their algae gardens or their patch of coral. As midday approaches and the sun reaches its zenith, the light penetrating the water is at its most intense. This is when photosynthesis is most active in the zooxanthellae living within the coral tissue. The corals are harvesting sunlight, converting it into energy, and using that energy to grow. But it is also a time of stress. Too much light, too much ultraviolet radiation can damage both the coral tissue and the symbiotic algae. This is when those fluorescent pigments we discussed earlier become important, acting as sunscreens and helping to moderate the intensity of light reaching the algae. The corals must balance the need for light with the danger of too much light. It is one of many delicate balances that the coral must maintain, and when environmental conditions push too far in one direction, that balance can break. But for now, on this perfect day, the balance holds. Afternoon on the reef is often a time of relative calm. Many fish are less active, having fed during the morning. They often seek shade during the hottest part of the day, resting under overhangs or within the reef structure. This is when you might see a sleeping parrotfish, its body encased in a transparent mucus cocoon that it secreted overnight and will break out of when evening comes. The cocoon may mask the fish's scent from nocturnal predators. Or you might encounter a turtle resting on a ledge, its eyes half closed, taking a break between feeding sessions. Even the octopus, normally shy and hidden, might be visible in the entrance to its den, its intelligent eyes watching you watch it. The reef never completely stops, but it does slow down. Life here has learned the value of rest, of conserving energy during the hours when conditions are less favorable for activity. As the sun begins its descent toward the horizon, the reef undergoes another transformation. The second shift change of the day is about to begin. This transition from day to night is perhaps the most dramatic. It is a brief window, lasting perhaps 30 minutes, when both the day crew and the night crew are active simultaneously. Diurnal fish hurry to find secure hiding spots for the night. They wedge themselves into crevices, tuck themselves under overhangs, or bury themselves in sand. At the same time, nocturnal creatures are beginning to stir. You might see a reef shark emerging from a cave where it spent the day resting, or a moray eel sliding out of its hole to begin a night of hunting. For a brief period, the reef is more crowded than at any other time. Then, as darkness falls, the day shift disappears and the night shift takes over completely. There is something magical about watching the reef as darkness falls. If you remain in the water, you will see bioluminescence begin to appear. When you wave your hand, tiny dinoflagellates in the water emit brief flashes of blue-green light, startled by the motion. The effect is like swimming through a liquid galaxy with stars appearing and fading around every movement. Some animals also use bioluminescence. Certain jellyfish pulse with internal light. Some fish have light-producing organs that they use to communicate or to lure prey. The reef at dusk, in that twilight zone between day and night, becomes a place of otherworldly beauty. The familiar transforms into the alien. Colors fade into shades of blue and gray. Shapes become ambiguous. Sounds change as different creatures vocalize. The reef you thought you knew reveals itself to be something else entirely. As complete darkness falls and the stars appear above the surface, the reef enters its nocturnal phase fully. This is a different world, and we will explore it soon. But for now, consider what you have just witnessed. A single cycle of day and night on the reef. The same cycle that happens every day, that has happened every day for thousands of years. The sunrise, the morning activity, the midday intensity, the afternoon rest, the evening transition, and the fall of darkness. Within this daily rhythm, the reef lives and breathes. Fish are born, predators hunt, prey escape or fall victim, coral polyps grow, microscopic algae photosynthesize, and the vast web of life that is the reef ecosystem continues to function. Tomorrow the sun will rise again, and it will happen all over. The patterns are ancient and reliable. The reef endures. Night on the reef is when the hidden world truly reveals itself. What was empty space during the day now teems with activity. The night shift has clocked in, and many of these creatures are far stranger and more alien than their diurnal counterparts. If you shine a light across the reef at night, you will see the reflective eyes of shrimp glowing like tiny stars, hundreds of them, scattered across every surface. The shrimp hide during the day, but emerge at night to feed on detritus and plankton. Crabs scuttle across the reef, their movements quick and jerky, searching for food. Worms extend their bodies from holes in the coral, their feeding tentacles spread to capture passing particles. The reef looks busier at night than during the day, though most of this activity is invisible to daytime visitors. The night reef is where the cleanup crew works, where decomposers and scavengers process waste and recycle nutrients. The coral themselves behave differently at night. During the day, most hard coral polyps are retracted into their calcium carbonate cups, relying primarily on their zooxanthellae for nutrition. But at night, many species extend their polyps fully, their tentacles reaching out to capture zooplankton from the water. The reef surface, which appeared relatively smooth during the day, now bristles with polyps. Each tiny mouth is waiting, tentacles armed with stinging cells called nematocysts that fire like harpoons when triggered by contact with prey. A copepod drifting too close to a polyp is instantly paralyzed by the sting, then drawn toward the mouth and swallowed. This happens millions of times every night across the reef. The coral are supplementing the nutrition they receive from their algae with the protein they capture from the water. They are both farmer and hunter, sustainer and predator. Some of the most impressive night hunters on the reef are the octopuses. During the day, an octopus remains in its den, hidden from potential predators and resting. But at night, it emerges to hunt. Watch one moving across the reef, and you will witness one of nature's most remarkable displays of camouflage. The octopus changes its color and texture continuously, matching whatever surface it crosses. Moving from coral to sand, its body shifts from the browns and oranges of coral to the pale gray of sand in less than a second. It can even create three-dimensional texture on its skin, raising bumps and ridges that mimic the surface below it. The octopus is also highly intelligent, capable of problem-solving and learning. It hunts crabs and small fish, using its 8 arms to probe every crevice. When it captures prey, it delivers a venomous bite that quickly immobilizes the victim. The larger predators of the reef also prefer to hunt at night. Moray eels, which often rest in holes during the day, come out to patrol the reef after dark. Their sense of smell is acute, and they follow scent trails to find sleeping fish. A moray's attack is quick and brutal. Once it grabs prey in its jaws, a second set of jaws, the pharyngeal jaws, shoots forward from within its throat to pull the prey down into its gullet. It is a mechanism straight from a nightmare, yet it is perfectly adapted to the moray's hunting strategy. Sharks also become more active at night. Small reef sharks patrol the shallows. their senses tuned to detect the electrical fields generated by the muscles of sleeping fish. The reef at night is more dangerous than during the day, at least from the perspective of small fish trying to survive until dawn. But the night is not only about predation, it is also a time of romance. Many marine animals spawn at night, releasing eggs and sperm into the water in spectacular synchronized events. Some species of coral, for example, spawn on only a few nights each year, timed precisely with the full moon and water temperature. On those special nights, the entire reef participates. Millions of polyps across thousands of coral colonies release their gametes simultaneously, filling the water with a blizzard of pink and orange bundles. The water becomes so thick with eggs and sperm that visibility drops to nearly zero. This mass spawning overwhelms predators. Even though fish gorge themselves on the eggs, the sheer volume of gametes released ensures that many survive to fertilize and develop. It is one of the most spectacular events in nature, a phenomenon that was only discovered by scientists in the early 1980s. The darkness of night also reveals bioluminescence in its full glory. Shine a light out into the open water away from the reef and then turn it off. Wait for your eyes to adjust. Now wave your hand through the water. You will create swirls and trails of blue-green light as dinoflagellates react to the disturbance. These single-celled organisms produce light as a defense mechanism, a burglar alarm meant to attract larger predators to whatever is disturbing them. The result is an underwater light show that must be seen to be believed. On certain nights, when conditions are right, the entire ocean can seem to glow with bioluminescence. Swimming through it feels like flying through space, surrounded by stars that respond to your every movement. It is one of the most magical experiences the natural world has to offer. Some creatures emerge at night that are rarely seen during the day. The basket stars are particularly remarkable. During the day, they remain tightly coiled, looking like hard balls of tangled branches tucked into crevices. But at night they unfurl, extending their incredibly branched arms into the current to form nets that can span a meter or more. These arms branch and rebranch, creating a fractal-like structure with thousands of tiny hooks that snag passing plankton. A single basket star can capture and consume thousands of tiny organisms in a single night. In the morning, as dawn approaches, the basket star will slowly coil itself back up, retracting into its daytime hiding place. It is a complete transformation, from a hard ball to an elaborate web and back again, repeated every day and night throughout its life. As the night progresses toward dawn, the activity on the reef gradually shifts again. The night hunters become satiated and begin to retreat to their daytime hiding spots. The scavengers and cleaners finish their work. The coral polyps slowly retract their tentacles. The reef is preparing for the sunrise and the return of the day shift. If you have stayed underwater through the entire night, you will witness another transition, another changing of the guard. And you will realize that the reef never truly rests. It simply changes its rhythms. Day and night are two sides of the same coin, two phases of the same cycle. What appears to be a single ecosystem during the day is revealed at night to be actually two ecosystems, two communities sharing the same space but operating on opposite schedules. The reef is always active. The reef is always alive. Every ecosystem is built on relationships between those who consume and those who are consumed. The reef is no exception. But here, the predator-prey dynamics are more complex, more nuanced than in most terrestrial environments. Let us explore these relationships and understand how they shape the reef. At the base of the food web are the primary producers, the photosynthetic organisms. The zooxanthellae within coral, the algae growing on surfaces, and the phytoplankton drifting in the water all convert sunlight into organic matter. These are the foundation. Everything else depends on capturing and transferring this energy up the food chain. Herbivores, the grazers and browsers, consume the algae and are in turn consumed by carnivores. And those carnivores may themselves be consumed by larger carnivores. Energy flows upward through the system, diminishing at each step. Let us follow one specific predator-prey interaction in detail. Watch that peacock mantis shrimp hiding in a burrow in the sand near the reef. It is one of the ocean's most remarkable predators, despite being only a few inches long. The mantis shrimp has eyes that can see polarized light and can detect colors humans cannot even imagine. It has specialized appendages that it uses as clubs, striking with such speed and force that the water around the impact cavitates, creating a bubble that collapses with a second impact and a flash of light. A mantis shrimp can punch with the force of a bullet. It uses this ability to smash open the shells of crabs and snails. Watch now as it detects a passing crab. The strike is too fast for your eye to follow. One moment, the crab is intact. The next, its shell is shattered and the mantis shrimp is dragging it back to its burrow to consume it in safety. But not all predation on the reef is violent. Much of it is subtle, patient, opportunistic. Consider the scorpionfish lying motionless on the reef surface. It is so well camouflaged that you might swim past it without noticing. Its body is covered with flaps and tassels of skin that break up its outline. Its coloration perfectly matches the algae-covered rocks where it rests. It does not chase its prey. It waits. It can remain motionless for hours, even days, waiting for a small fish to swim within striking distance. When prey approaches, the scorpionfish opens its massive mouth and creates a vacuum that sucks the prey in along with surrounding water. The attack takes about 15 milliseconds. By the time the prey fish realizes danger is near, it is already inside the predator's mouth. This is ambush predation perfected through millions of years of evolution. Prey species, of course, have evolved their own defenses. Some use camouflage just as effectively as predators do. The leaf fish looks exactly like a piece of dead seagrass drifting in the current, allowing it to avoid predation while simultaneously sneaking up on its own prey. Other species use bright colors as warning signals, advertising their toxicity. The blue-ringed octopus, tiny and beautiful, carries venom powerful enough to kill a human. Its bright blue rings signal danger to potential predators. Pufferfish can inflate themselves with water, making them too large to swallow and presenting a mouthful of spines to any predator foolish enough to try. Many fish have venomous spines that cause intense pain if a predator bites down. The lionfish, spectacular with its flowing fins and striped body, is almost entirely protected by venomous spines that deter all but the most desperate predators. The relationship between predator and prey creates an evolutionary arms race that drives much of the diversity we see on reefs. As prey evolve better defenses, predators must evolve better ways to overcome those defenses. As predators become more effective hunters, prey must develop new evasion tactics. This back and forth has been ongoing for hundreds of millions of years, and it continues today. Some of the solutions evolution has produced are bizarrely specific. There are fish that specialize in eating only the eyes of other fish. Snails that eat only one species of coral. Crabs that live only on one species of sea star. This extreme specialization is possible because the reef is so productive and so stable that even highly specific niches can be filled. There is enough abundance to support specialists alongside generalists. At the top of the reef food chain sit the apex predators, large animals with few or no natural predators of their own. Sharks are the most iconic of these. A reef shark patrolling the edge of the reef serves a crucial ecological function. By preying on sick, weak, and unwary fish, sharks maintain the health of fish populations. They prevent any single species from becoming too abundant. Their presence shapes the behavior of every other animal on the reef. Fish are more cautious, more alert when sharks are near. This creates a cascade effect throughout the ecosystem. The shark's influence extends far beyond the fish it actually kills. Its mere presence changes how other animals behave, which changes how they interact with their own prey and with each other. Remove the apex predators from a reef, and the entire ecosystem can shift into an unbalanced state. But even apex predators can become prey in the right circumstances. A sick or injured shark may fall victim to smaller predators that would normally avoid it. And all reef organisms, predators and prey alike, are ultimately consumed by decomposers when they die. The bacteria and fungi and scavenging invertebrates that break down dead tissue are the true final consumers in the system. They release nutrients back into the water where they can be taken up by algae and phytoplankton, restarting the cycle. Death on the reef is not an ending, it is a transformation. The atoms that made up a shark will become coral polyps, will become fish, will become shark again. Matter cycles, energy flows. The system is circular, sustainable, balanced. At least it has been balanced for millions of years. Whether it will remain balanced in the future is a question we must soon address. The predator-prey relationships on the reef create a dynamic equilibrium. Population sizes fluctuate but remain within bounds. When prey becomes abundant, predator populations grow. When predators become too numerous, they reduce prey populations, which then causes predator populations to decline due to starvation, which allows prey to rebound. These cycles have occurred naturally for millions of years. The system is resilient. It can absorb disturbances and return to balance. But that resilience has limits. Push the system too far in one direction, remove too many species, add too many stressors, and the equilibrium can break. The relationships that seem stable for millions of years can collapse in a single generation. This is the fragility hidden within the apparent permanence of the reef. And it is this fragility that we must understand if we are to protect these ecosystems into the future. We have explored the beauty of the reef, its biodiversity, its daily rhythms, and its intricate relationships. Now we must discuss something more difficult. We must talk about fragility. Despite their appearance of permanence, despite existing for millions of years, coral reefs are among the most sensitive ecosystems on Earth. They thrive only within a narrow range of environmental conditions. The water must be warm, but not too warm. It must be clear, allowing sunlight to penetrate. It must be salty with the right chemistry. And when these conditions change too quickly, when the environment shifts beyond the tolerance of the corals and their zooxanthellae, the partnership that makes everything else possible can break. What you are about to see is the dark side of the reef story. It is uncomfortable. It is uncomfortable, but it is necessary. If we are to understand and protect these ecosystems, we must understand their vulnerabilities. The most visible threat to reefs today is coral bleaching. Remember the symbiosis between coral and zooxanthellae that we discussed? Remember how essential that partnership is. When water temperature rises even a degree or two above normal and stays elevated for weeks, the zooxanthellae become stressed. They begin to produce reactive oxygen species, toxic compounds that damage both themselves and the coral tissue housing them. Coral, sensing this damage, expels the algae from its tissue. This bleaching. Without the golden brown zooxanthellae, the transparent coral tissue reveals the white calcium carbonate skeleton beneath. The reef turns ghostly pale. The coral is not yet dead. It can survive for weeks or even months without its algae, living on stored reserves and captured prey. But it is starving. And if temperatures do not return to normal quickly, the coral will die. Coral bleaching was rare before the 1980s. It is common. Mass bleaching events where huge areas of reef bleach simultaneously are occurring with increasing frequency. The Great Barrier Reef has experienced several mass bleaching events in recent years. Reefs in the Caribbean, the Indian Ocean, and the Pacific have all been affected. The cause is clear. Rising ocean temperatures due to climate change are pushing corals beyond their thermal tolerance. The partnership that worked perfectly for millions of years is breaking under the stress of rapid environmental change. Some reefs recover if temperatures drop quickly enough. The zooxanthellae recolonize the coral tissue and the partnership resumes. But repeated bleaching events, striking before corals have time to recover, can kill even the largest, oldest coral colonies. And when the coral dies, the ecosystem it supported begins to collapse. But rising temperature is not the only threat. Ocean acidification is another consequence of increased carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. The ocean absorbs about a quarter of the carbon dioxide humans release. When carbon dioxide dissolves in seawater, it forms carbonic acid, lowering the ocean's pH. This might sound minor, but it has profound consequences for organisms that build calcium carbonate structures. As the ocean becomes more acidic, it becomes more difficult for corals to extract calcium carbonate from the water and build their skeletons. Growth rates slow. The balance between construction and erosion shifts toward erosion. In some projections, if atmospheric carbon dioxide continues to rise, the ocean could become corrosive to calcium carbonate by the end of this century. At that point, coral reefs as we know them may not be able to exist. They would dissolve faster than they could grow. Beyond climate change, reefs face many other pressures. Overfishing removes important herbivorous fish, allowing algae to overgrow corals and smother them. Destructive fishing practices using dynamite or cyanide directly destroy reef structure. Coastal development increases sedimentation, smothering corals under mud and blocking the sunlight they need. Pollution from agricultural runoff and sewage introduces excess nutrients that feed algae blooms and deplete oxygen. Plastic waste accumulates on reefs, entangling organisms and introducing toxins. Tourism, if not carefully managed, can cause physical damage as boats anchor on reefs and divers inadvertently touch or break corals. Each of these threats alone can damage reefs. Together, they create a cascade of stresses that many reefs cannot withstand. The corals are being squeezed from multiple directions simultaneously. They are fighting a battle on many fronts. When coral dies and is not replaced, the reef undergoes a phase shift. Algae, no longer controlled by herbivorous fish and no longer outcompeted by fast-growing coral, takes over. A once vibrant coral reef can transform into an algae-dominated system in just a few years. This is not necessarily permanent. If stresses are removed and conditions improve, coral can potentially recolonize. But the longer the algae remains dominant, the harder it becomes for coral to return. The reef has multiple stable states, one dominated by coral and one dominated by algae. Disturbance can push the system from one state to the other. And once in the algae-dominated state, enormous effort may be required to shift it back. Some reefs that transitioned decades ago have never recovered. They remain ghostly reminders of what was lost. Underwater graveyards where biodiversity has collapsed and ecological function has ceased. You might be wondering if there is any hope. The situation sounds dire, and in many ways it is. But nature is resilient in ways we are only beginning to understand. Some corals are more tolerant of heat than others. Some populations contain individuals that can survive conditions that kill their neighbors. These stress-tolerant corals, if they can reproduce and spread, might be the foundation of future reefs. Scientists are now working to identify these resilient individuals and use them in restoration efforts. Coral gardening, where fragments are grown in nurseries and then transplanted back onto degraded reefs, is showing promise in some locations. Other researchers are experimenting with assisted evolution, selectively breeding corals for heat tolerance, or even modifying their symbionts to function better at higher temperatures. These efforts are controversial and their success uncertain, but they represent hope. They represent human ingenuity being directed toward repair rather than destruction. The ultimate fate of coral reefs will depend on choices humanity makes in the coming decades. If we can stabilize the climate, reduce local stresses on reefs, and give them space and time to adapt, many reefs may survive. They may look different. They may be dominated by different species, but they can persist. If we fail to act, if warming continues unabated and the multiple stresses intensify, we may lose most coral reefs within our lifetimes. This is not speculation. This is the consensus of the scientific community. The reefs you have explored during this journey, these ancient structures built over thousands of years, these biodiversity hotspots that support millions of human livelihoods, are at a tipping point. What happens next is not predetermined. It is a choice, and the window for making that choice is closing. The fragility of the reef is also the fragility of our relationship with the natural world. What we do to the reef, we do to ourselves. Beyond their intrinsic beauty and biodiversity, coral reefs provide crucial services to humanity. They are not just biological wonders existing in isolation. They are intimately connected to human communities, providing protection, food, and livelihoods to hundreds of millions of people worldwide. Let us explore these connections and understand why the health of reefs matters to all of us, even those who will never have the privilege of visiting one. First, and perhaps most importantly, reefs protect coastlines from storms and erosion. The physical structure of a reef acts as a breakwater, absorbing the energy of waves before they reach shore. During hurricanes and typhoons, this protection becomes critical. Studies have shown that reefs reduce wave energy by an average of 97%. Without reefs, many coastal communities would be far more vulnerable to storm surge and flooding. The reef is a natural seawall, built and maintained by biology. Reefs are also crucial sources of protein for coastal populations. Reef fisheries provide food for perhaps 500 million people globally, particularly in developing nations where protein sources may be limited. The fish that live on and around reefs are harvested for local consumption and for commercial sale. When managed sustainably, reef fisheries can provide food indefinitely. But when overfished, they collapse, and the communities that depend on them suffer. The relationship between humans and reef fisheries is ancient. Archaeological evidence suggests that people have been fishing on reefs for at least 40,000 years. The knowledge of which fish to catch, when to catch them, and how much can be taken without damaging the population has been passed down through generations. This traditional ecological knowledge is invaluable, but it is being lost as younger generations move away from fishing communities and as reefs degrade. Tourism is another major economic benefit provided by reefs. People travel from around the world to snorkel and dive on coral reefs. In some countries, reef tourism is a major source of foreign currency and employment. The Great Barrier Reef alone contributes billions of dollars annually to the Australian economy and supports tens of thousands of jobs. Caribbean nations similarly depend heavily on reef tourism. When reefs degrade, tourism declines and economies suffer. The economic argument for reef conservation is compelling. A living reef is worth far more over time than a dead one. The challenge is that the economic benefits are often diffused across many people and many years, while the costs of conservation or the short-term profits from exploitation accrue to specific individuals or companies. This creates a tragedy of the commons where individual incentives do not align with collective long-term interests. Reefs also provide important materials and medicines. Coral rock has been used as a building material in coastal regions for centuries, and when harvested sustainably from already dead coral, this can be acceptable. But mining living reef for construction material is destructive and is now illegal in most places. More intriguingly, many reef organisms produce unique chemical compounds as defenses against predators or to prevent fouling. These compounds are of intense interest to pharmaceutical researchers. Several important drugs have been derived from reef organisms, including treatments for cancer, pain, and inflammation. The genetic diversity of reef ecosystems represents a vast library of potential medicines. Every species lost is a book burned before it could be read. The potential for medical breakthroughs from reef organisms is one of many arguments for conservation. We should protect reefs not just for what they are, but for what they might teach us. The cultural importance of reefs to coastal peoples cannot be overstated. Many indigenous cultures have spiritual connections to reefs, viewing them as sacred places or as the dwelling places of ancestors and deities. Traditional ceremonies may be tied to reef cycles such as coral spawning or fish migrations. Art, music, and oral traditions of coastal cultures are often deeply intertwined with the reef. When reefs degrade, it is not just an environmental loss or an economic loss. It is a cultural loss. It represents the severing of ancient connections between people and place. Some traditional ecological knowledge about reefs exists nowhere in written form. It lives only in the minds of elders who learned it from their elders. As those people pass away and as younger generations lose interest or move to cities, this knowledge is lost forever. Protecting reefs means protecting cultures. The services reefs provide are often called ecosystem services by scientists and economists who attempt to calculate their value in monetary terms. These calculations, while imperfect, are staggering. The global economic value of coral reefs is estimated at somewhere between $300 billion and $10 trillion, depending on methodology. Per hectare, coral reefs are among the most economically valuable ecosystems on Earth, rivaling or exceeding even tropical rainforests. Yet we invest far less in reef conservation than we do in protecting other valuable assets. If a piece of infrastructure worth billions of dollars were at risk, we would not hesitate to spend what is necessary to protect it. Reefs are infrastructure. They are natural infrastructure. They are billions of years of evolutionary engineering, and we are allowing them to degrade because we have not internalized their true value. In recent years, the concept of coral reef restoration has gained traction. Around the world, community groups, NGOs, governments, and private companies are attempting to actively restore damaged reefs. These efforts take many forms. Coral gardening grows coral fragments in nurseries before transplanting them to reefs. Artificial reef structures provide substrate for coral settlement. Removing algae and reintroducing herbivorous fish can help shift reefs back from algae dominance. In some places, damaged reefs are being electrically stimulated to speed the growth of calcium carbonate. These efforts are labor-intensive and expensive, and their success varies. But they demonstrate human willingness to invest in repairing what we have damaged. They demonstrate hope. And in some locations, they are working. Restored reefs are supporting fish populations, protecting coasts, and providing livelihoods again. Restoration is not a substitute for reducing the stresses on reefs, but it can buy time. And time is what we desperately need. Ultimately, the future of coral reefs and the communities that depend on them are inseparable from the future of the global climate and oceans. Local conservation efforts, while important, cannot succeed if global environmental conditions continue to deteriorate. We need both. We need to reduce greenhouse gas emissions to stabilize the climate. We need to improve water quality, reduce overfishing, protect critical habitats, and manage coastal development responsibly. And we need to value reefs not just as resources to exploit, but as wonders to protect. The relationship between humanity and coral reefs reflects our relationship with nature more broadly. We are part of nature, not separate from it. When we damage reefs, we damage ourselves. When we protect them, we protect our own future. The guardians of the coast need guardians of their own. And the only species capable of filling that role is us. We have discussed the threats facing coral reefs and the challenges of protecting them. Now let us talk about resilience. Let us talk about the capacity of reefs to survive, adapt, and persist in the face of change. Because despite everything we have discussed, despite the very real threats and the legitimate reasons for concern, reefs have proven themselves to be remarkably tough. They have survived 5 mass extinction events over their evolutionary history. They have endured ice ages and hothouse climates. They have adapted to changing ocean chemistry and shifting continental configurations. The coral you see today are the descendants of survivors. They carry within their genes the capacity for resilience. The question is whether they can adapt quickly enough to match the pace of current changes. Can evolution keep up with climate change? Can natural selection produce heat-tolerant corals before the heat kills all the corals? We do not know for certain, but there are reasons for hope. One source of hope lies in the genetic diversity of coral populations. Not all corals within a species are identical. Some individuals are more tolerant of heat stress than others. When a bleaching event occurs, the less tolerant individuals die, while the more tolerant ones survive. Those survivors reproduce, and their offspring inherit at least some of their heat tolerance. This is natural selection happening in real time. After multiple bleaching events, reef populations can shift toward greater heat tolerance. Studies have documented this occurring in some regions. It is evolution on a human timescale. The concern is whether this adaptation can happen fast enough. If bleaching events occur every few years, allowing no time for recovery, even adapted corals may not survive. But if we can slow the rate of warming and reduce other stresses, adaptation may give reefs a fighting chance. Another source of hope is human ingenuity directed toward conservation. Around the world, marine protected areas are being established to reduce local stresses on reefs. In these protected zones, fishing is restricted or banned, physical damage is minimized, and water quality is monitored and improved. Studies show that reefs within well-managed marine protected areas are more resilient to bleaching than reefs outside protected areas. They recover faster after disturbances. They maintain higher fish populations and greater biodiversity. Marine protected areas are not a solution to climate change. They cannot prevent warming or acidification, but they can reduce other stresses and give reefs the best possible chance to survive and adapt. And they work. Wherever they have been properly implemented and enforced, reefs have benefited. This is proven. This is not speculation or wishful thinking. Protection works. Technology is also being brought to bear on coral conservation in creative ways. Drones and satellites can now monitor reef health over large areas, detecting bleaching events as they occur and tracking recovery over time. Artificial intelligence is being used to analyze thousands of underwater images, automatically identifying and counting species and assessing coral cover. Genetic techniques allow scientists to identify heat-tolerant coral strains and track their spread. 3D printing is being used to create complex artificial reef structures that mimic natural coral architecture and provide optimal substrate for coral settlement. Even genetic engineering is being explored, though carefully and controversially, as a potential tool to help corals adapt faster than natural selection alone would allow. These technologies are not magic solutions. They cannot replace the need to address root causes like climate change, but they expand our toolkit. They give us more options for helping reefs survive the coming decades. And they demonstrate that humanity's capacity for innovation can be directed toward healing rather than harm. We built many of the problems reefs face. Perhaps we can also build some of the solutions. There are also examples of remarkable reef recovery that offer inspiration. In some regions where local threats were reduced and climate conditions temporarily improved, reefs that were heavily damaged have recovered substantially within a decade or two. New coral growth covers old skeletons. Fish populations rebound. The ecosystem begins to function again. These recoveries demonstrate that reef degradation is not always permanent. Given the right conditions, reefs can heal. They can come back. The process is slow by human standards, but remarkably fast on geological timescales. A reef that was devastated by a crown of thorns, starfish outbreak, or a severe bleaching event can, in favorable circumstances, regain much of its coral cover within 10 to 15 years. This is the resilience we must nurture and protect. This is the capacity for regeneration that gives us hope. Young people around the world are increasingly engaged in reef conservation, bringing fresh energy and perspectives to the challenge. Student groups organize beach cleanups and reef monitoring programs. Young scientists pursue careers in marine biology and conservation. Youth activists pressure governments and corporations to take climate action. This generational engagement is crucial because the decisions we make now will determine what kind of reefs, if any, exist decades from now when today's children are adults. The current generation of young people will inherit both the consequences of our actions and the responsibility to continue the work of conservation. Many of them understand this deeply. They recognize that their future is tied to the health of the ocean, and they refuse to accept the loss of coral reefs as inevitable. Their passion and commitment are powerful forces for change. It is also important to recognize the indigenous and local communities who have been stewarding reefs for generations. Their knowledge of reef ecosystems, built through centuries of close observation and dependence, is invaluable. Many traditional management practices, such as seasonal fishing closures and taboo areas where fishing is forbidden, align with modern conservation science. In some regions, combining traditional knowledge with scientific research has produced the most effective conservation outcomes. These communities have the most to lose if reefs collapse, and they often have the strongest motivation to protect them. Supporting their rights, listening to their knowledge, and empowering them to manage their own resources is not just ethically correct. It is strategically smart. The future of many reefs will depend on the actions of the people who live closest to them. Hope is not the same as optimism. Optimism is the belief that things will turn out well. Hope is the determination to work for good outcomes even when success is uncertain. The future of coral reefs is uncertain. Many will be lost. Some may already be beyond saving, but others can survive if we act decisively and quickly. The window is closing, but it has not yet closed. Every fraction of a degree of warming we prevent, every ton of plastic we keep out of the ocean, every marine protected area we establish, every coral fragment we plant gives reefs a better chance. Small actions accumulate. Individual choices matter, and collective action can achieve what seems impossible. The reefs have survived for millions of years through countless challenges. With our help, they can survive this one too. That is not naive optimism. That is hard-won hope based on understanding both the problems and the possibilities. Let us now expand our perspective and consider coral reefs not as isolated ecosystems, but as parts of a global network of life. The health of reefs is connected to the health of other marine ecosystems, to the health of terrestrial systems, and ultimately to the health of the entire planet. Ocean currents carry larvae from one reef to another, maintaining genetic connectivity between distant populations. Fish that spawn on reefs may spend parts of their lives in seagrass beds or mangrove forests before returning to reefs as adults. Nutrients cycle between reefs and the open ocean. The oxygen produced by coral and algae enters the atmosphere and is breathed by organisms thousands of kilometers away. We cannot protect reefs in isolation. We must think in terms of connected systems, of relationships that span ocean basins and cross ecosystem boundaries. The reef is a node in a planetary web of life. Consider the journey of a sea turtle. It hatches on a beach, enters the ocean, and spends years drifting with currents, feeding in the open ocean. As it matures, it migrates to coastal waters where it feeds on seagrass or jellyfish. Eventually, it may take up residence on a coral reef, grazing on algae and sponges. When it reaches breeding age, it migrates, sometimes thousands of kilometers, back to the beach where it was born to lay its own eggs. This single animal connects beaches, open ocean, seagrass meadows, and coral reefs in its life cycle. It carries nutrients and energy between these systems. What happens on the reef affects the turtle, but the turtle's survival also depends on the health of all the other ecosystems it passes through. Protecting the turtle means protecting the entire network of habitats it requires. This is true for countless marine species. The boundaries we draw between ecosystems are often artificial. Mangrove forests, often found adjacent to coral reefs, provide essential nursery habitat for many reef fish. The complex root systems of mangroves offer shelter where juvenile fish can grow relatively safe from predators. As these fish mature, they migrate to the reef where they join the adult population. Studies show that reefs near healthy mangroves support larger and more diverse fish communities than reefs where mangroves have been destroyed. Similarly, seagrass beds filter nutrients and sediments before they reach reefs, improving water quality. They also provide grazing grounds for herbivorous fish and foraging areas for larger species. The three ecosystems, mangroves, seagrass, and coral reefs, function as a connected system. Damage to one affects the others. Conservation efforts that protect only reefs while ignoring mangroves and seagrass are incomplete. We must think bigger. We must protect entire coastal seascapes. The connection between reefs and the open ocean is equally important. Coral reefs produce larvae that drift with currents and can settle on reefs hundreds or even thousands of kilometers away. This larval dispersal maintains genetic diversity and allows populations to recover from local disasters by receiving immigrants from distant reefs. But it also means that the loss of one reef affects others. A reef that is destroyed not only loses its own biodiversity, but also stops producing larvae that might have replenished other reefs. Conversely, a healthy reef can serve as a source, continuously supplying larvae to downstream reefs that may be experiencing recruitment failures. Marine protected areas need to be designed with these connections in mind, creating networks of protected reefs that can support one another through larval exchange. The ocean does not respect political boundaries or property lines. Marine conservation must operate at the scale of ocean currents. Reefs also have surprising connections to terrestrial ecosystems. Seabirds that nest on islands and feed in the ocean deposit nutrients on land through their guano. Rain washes these nutrients back into the ocean, enriching nearby reefs. Islands with large seabird colonies often have more productive adjacent reefs than islands without seabirds. Similarly, rivers carry nutrients from inland forests to the coast. These nutrients can benefit reefs if they arrive in appropriate quantities, but excessive nutrient runoff from agriculture causes problems. Everything is connected. Changes in land use. Hundreds of kilometers inland can affect coral reefs on the coast. Deforestation increases erosion, which increases sedimentation on reefs. Agricultural chemicals enter streams and eventually reach the ocean. Even air pollution from distant cities can affect reef health through acid rain or by contributing to climate change. The reef is not separate from the rest of the world. It is embedded in it. The global carbon cycle connects every ecosystem on Earth, and reefs play a role in it. The calcium carbonate that corals deposit to build their skeletons is a form of carbon storage. Over geological time, coral reefs have sequestered enormous amounts of carbon from the ocean and atmosphere. Ancient coral reefs, now uplifted and exposed on land, form limestone deposits that cover large areas of continents. The White Cliffs of Dover are made of the calcium carbonate skeletons of marine organisms, including corals. Modern reefs continue this process, removing carbon from the ocean and storing it in solid form. However, the relationship between reefs and the carbon cycle is complex. The actual process of calcification releases carbon dioxide, so reefs are both sinks and sources of carbon depending on the balance of biological processes. What is clear is that reefs are part of the planetary carbon budget. Their health affects and is affected by the carbon dioxide concentration in the atmosphere. Perhaps the most profound connection is the one between coral reefs and human civilization. Over half of humanity lives within 100 kilometers of a coast. The ocean provides food, regulates climate, produces oxygen, and offers recreation and inspiration. Coral reefs are among the ocean's most productive and biodiverse ecosystems. Their decline would represent not just an environmental loss, but a humanitarian crisis. Millions of people would lose their primary source of protein. Coastal communities would become more vulnerable to storms and erosion. Entire industries based on reef tourism would collapse. The cultural traditions of reef-dependent peoples would be severed, and we would all lose something less tangible but equally important: the wonder and beauty of these ecosystems, the knowledge that such places exist, the inspiration they provide. A world without coral reefs would be not just a biologically impoverished world, but a spiritually impoverished one as well. Understanding these connections should change how we think about conservation. We cannot save coral reefs by focusing only on coral reefs. We must address climate change, which means transforming global energy systems. We must improve land use practices to reduce runoff and erosion. We must manage fisheries sustainably across entire ocean basins. We must protect mangroves and seagrass beds. We must reduce plastic pollution at its source. These challenges seem overwhelming when considered individually, but they are all part of the same challenge: the challenge of living sustainably on a finite planet. The challenge of recognizing that we are part of nature, not separate from it. Coral reefs teach us this lesson clearly. They show us that everything is connected. They show us that the health of distant ecosystems affects our own well-being. They show us that we are all part of the global web of life, and they ask us to act accordingly. We have journeyed through the coral reef ecosystem, from the microscopic partnership between polyp and algae to the global connections that link reefs to the entire planet. We have witnessed incredible beauty and diversity. We have learned about resilience and fragility, and now we must confront a simple but profound question: what will we choose? The future of coral reefs is not predetermined. It is not written in stone. It depends on decisions that are being made right now by governments and corporations and communities and individuals. Every choice we make about energy, about consumption, about how we treat the natural world contributes to the trajectory of reef ecosystems. We are at a decision point. The path we choose in the next decade will determine whether our grandchildren will be able to experience what you have experienced in this journey, or whether coral reefs will become nothing more than stories, images in old videos, memories of something lost. The science is clear. The warming climate is the greatest threat to coral reefs. If we continue on our current trajectory, most coral reefs will experience annual bleaching by the middle of this century, making recovery impossible. But if we can limit warming to 1.5 or 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels, many reefs can adapt and survive. That is the target. That is what we must aim for. Achieving it requires rapid and dramatic reductions in greenhouse gas emissions. It requires transitioning from fossil fuels to renewable energy. It requires changes in agriculture, transportation, industry, and land use. These changes are technically feasible. The technology exists. Knowledge exists. What has been lacking is the political will and the social momentum to implement changes at the necessary scale and speed. But that is changing. Trying. Awareness is growing. Action is accelerating. The question is whether we will move fast enough, but climate action alone is not enough. Even as we address the global threat, we must also address local threats to reefs. Overfishing must stop. Destructive fishing practices must be banned and enforcement must be strengthened. Coastal development must be planned carefully to minimize impacts on water quality and reef access. Pollution, whether from agricultural runoff, sewage, or plastics, must be dramatically reduced. Marine protected areas must be expanded and properly managed. These actions are within reach. They do not require global coordination. They can be implemented by national and local governments, by communities, by individuals, and they make a difference. They give reefs the best possible chance to survive the climate changes that are already unavoidable. Think of it as first aid for ecosystems. We are treating the injuries while also working to prevent future harm. Both are necessary. You might be wondering what you personally can do. The scale of the challenge can feel paralyzing. How can individual actions matter when the problem is global? But remember what we learned about coral reefs. They are built by tiny polyps, one calcium carbonate increment at a time. Massive structures grow from small, repeated actions. The same principle applies to social change. Your choices matter. Reduce your carbon footprint by changing how you use energy, how you travel, what you consume. Support businesses and politicians that prioritize environmental protection. If you eat seafood, choose species that are sustainably harvested. Reduce your use of single-use plastics. If you have the opportunity to visit a coral reef, do so responsibly, choosing operators that follow best practices. And perhaps most importantly, talk about these issues. Share what you have learned. The more people understand the value and vulnerability of coral reefs, the more likely we are to protect them. There is also power in collective action. Join or support organizations working on ocean conservation. Participate in beach cleanups and citizen science projects. Vote for leaders who take environmental issues seriously. Advocate for policy changes at local, national, and international levels. Use your voice and your platform, whatever it may be, to push for change. Social movements have changed the world before. Movements built by ordinary people who decided that the status quo was unacceptable. The environmental movement has already achieved remarkable victories, from the creation of national parks to the ban on ozone-depleting chemicals that was causing a hole in our ozone layer. Coral reefs need that same energy and commitment. They need people who care enough to act, who refuse to accept their loss as inevitable. You could be one of those people. Your contribution, combined with millions of others, could make the difference. It is also worth considering the moral dimension of this choice. Future generations will live with the consequences of our decisions. They will inherit either a world where coral reefs still exist or a world where they have been lost. What do we owe to those future people? What do we owe to the other species with whom we share this planet? Some would argue that we have a moral obligation to preserve the natural heritage we have inherited, to pass it on intact or improved to those who come after us. Others would argue from a perspective of intrinsic value, that coral reefs and the species they contain have a right to exist independent of their usefulness to humans. Whatever ethical framework you prefer, it is hard to argue that the destruction of one of Earth's most biodiverse ecosystems is morally acceptable when we have the knowledge and means to prevent it. This is not a situation where we are helpless. We have agency. We have choice. And with choice comes responsibility. There will be losses. Some reefs have already crossed thresholds from which recovery may not be possible. Some species may be lost. The reefs of the future, even in the best-case scenario, may look different from the reefs of the past. They may be dominated by different species. They may be less diverse. We must be honest about this. We must mourn what has been lost and what will be lost. But mourning should not lead to paralysis. It should lead to determination. The reefs that remain, the corals that survive, are precious beyond measure. They are worth fighting for. Every reef saved is a victory. Every population protected is a triumph. We cannot save everything, but we can save much. And we must try. The alternative, to simply accept the loss of coral reefs as inevitable and do nothing, is unthinkable. It would be a betrayal of everything we value about the natural world. It would be a failure of imagination and courage. The story of coral reefs in the 21st century is still being written. We are the authors. Our choices will determine the ending. Will it be a tragedy, a tale of beauty lost through negligence and short-sightedness? Or will it be a story of resilience, adaptation, and the power of humanity to change course when faced with crisis? The coral polyp building its skeleton, one increment at a time, does not know the future. It simply does what it has always done, growing, reproducing, maintaining the partnership with its algae. The reef as a whole does not plan or worry. It exists moment to moment, responding to conditions as they arise. We are different. We have foresight. We can imagine futures that have not yet occurred. We can see the consequences of our actions before we take them, and we can choose to act differently. That is our unique capability. That is our responsibility. The coral reef has shown us its secrets. It has shared its beauty. Now it asks something in return. It asks us to care. It asks us to act. It asks us to choose a future where it still exists. Our journey through the coral reef is complete. You have descended into another world, witnessed partnerships that have endured for millions of years, explored biodiversity that rivals anything on land, and confronted the fragility of even the most ancient ecosystems. The coral reef is a miracle of biology, a masterpiece of evolution, a gift that we have only recently learned to appreciate. What you do with this knowledge, what actions you take, what choices you make, will contribute to the future of these remarkable places. The reef has shared its story with you. Now you are part of that story. Every time you look at the ocean, remember what lies beneath. Remember the tiny polyps building their calcium carbonate castles. Remember the symbiosis that makes it all possible. Remember the abundance and beauty and interconnection. And remember that it is all at risk. But also remember that it is not yet lost. The coral reef still exists. It still thrives in many places. It can still be saved. Thank you for joining me on this journey. May it inspire you to act, to care, and to never stop wondering at the incredible diversity of life on our blue planet.